Hey guys, it's me, Gavin, and welcome back to the Backlog Bunker. For the first time in a while, I have played Final Fantasy VII, and I don't really have much to say about it except for the fact that something I'm missing from the Pixel remasters that I might have gone over in a previous episode is that in Final Fantasy VII, the targeting system is awful. The way that it worked in the Pixel remasters was that you had a menu in the actual combat menu that you could go through to scroll through enemies that I think also worked dynamically with the way they were placed. So if you went left or right, it would go left or right in the actual battle screen, but going through the menu would look kind of random. But if you just went up and down, you would go through the menu and it would scroll through the enemies properly. So if you just memorize what order the enemies were in, you could always get to whoever you're trying to attack quickly. But in 7, there is no list of enemies. You only can go through them as they are placed on the battle map, which would be fine in most games, except for the fact that Final Fantasy VII has a dynamic camera that's always moving and shaking and all kinds of bullshit. Which means that at any given moment, up or down to an enemy will mean something completely different, and you won't be able to target anyone consistently. On top of the fact that you can target your own party members for a multitude of reasons that I don't think are very engaging, but the point is, they also can get targeted, and they also move, just like the enemies do. So again, what up or down means in the context of any given situation will mean something completely different in any other situation. So being able to consistently target enemies is not something you can do quickly, which wouldn't be a problem in most RPGs, except for that this is a, what's it called? Time battle? Something like that. Point is, it's bad. Otherwise, Final Fantasy VII is still just an okay game. I'm still waiting for the other shoe to drop and for it to become a good RPG, because a lot of RPGs do have that moment where it's like, okay, now you can play the game. Xenoblade is famously guilty of this. And this does happen to an extent with other Final Fantasy games. With 6, it was with the Magicite. Even though I don't consider that to be a very engaging gameplay mechanic, it still was pretty late into the game for being such a big part of it. And arguably job hybrids in Final Fantasy V, because you don't really get to make use of it until you have a number of jobs you'd even want to cross-pollinate, and you don't really get to make use of it until you're basically at the end of the game. Whatever the case may be, Final Fantasy VII still has a lot of time to hook me, but I don't really have my hopes up, because I don't think I like this series very much, but we shall see. And the next thing I want to talk about is not something that's specific to Dead Cells, but it did come to my mind because of Dead Cells, which is a consistency in action games. To be specific, in Dead Cells there's a stun mechanic where if you hit an enemy enough times, they'll just get stunned and they'll interrupt whatever they're doing. And in a lot of cases, that's how you get your kills in. Because in a lot of cases, enemies will just no-sell you hitting them, so you'll either have to dodge or parry whatever their attack they're throwing at you, which might not work if you don't have a shield. Or if you're put in a situation where dodging is not a good choice, which does happen semi-frequently, especially in the toxic sewers. So there will be a lot of times where I'm attacking an enemy and I will just go all in on attacking them because there's a pretty good chance that I get a stun in and I don't have to worry about dodging or parrying. But then there are a lot of times where they don't get stunned, and I don't know what the difference is between those times, because there's no in-game tutorial about how stuns work. It's just something you notice eventually. Sometimes when you hit enemies, they'll just get stunned. And as far as I can tell, there's no consistent damage cap that you need to hit to stun an enemy. Sometimes it just happens and sometimes it doesn't. Which sometimes isn't even that big of a deal in action games because there is just a lot of variety in the things enemies will do. They don't always use the same attacks, etc, etc. But it's different in Dead Cells because Dead Cells is a game that demands perfection from you. And something myself and many others before me have said is that a game can't really demand perfection from a player without giving perfection back. And I would consider working consistently to be perfection. If asking the game a question and not always receiving the same response is something that just happens sometimes, then how can you demand of me to beat a floor without taking any damage or anything like that? I just recently acquired my second boss cell for the first time ever, so now I'm finally playing the game on 2 boss cells, and doing so reduces the healing that you get on each floor. And again, as many others have pointed out before me, healing is indicative of how many mistakes the player can make, but that doesn't really fit when a lot of the things I have to heal for, like an enemy not getting stunned and hitting me in the middle of my combo, when what I expected was for the enemy to get stunned because I was fucking assailing them, which is going to be hard to call a mistake after the fact, because did I make a mistake or did I make a reasonable assumption based on what I thought I knew about the game? Though to make good on my promise that I'm not picking on Dead Cells here, let's just mention DMC for a second. DMC on Hell in Hell is not what I would call a game giving me perfection, due to a couple of factors I've mentioned based on talking about the game previously. Things like how often enemies will get stunned, what attacks enemies will use if they attack in the first place, things of that nature that pop up semi-frequently when trying to play the game without getting hit at all. And this does happen in other genres, obviously. Splatoon 2 is one that comes to mind because of the Octo expansion. I remember there's this one mission that everybody fucking hates because it's really hard, where you have to fight a wave of Octolings, and it's one of the last missions you do in the game, so it's supposed to be really hard, but it's really inconsistent because sometimes they just dome you from halfway across the map, and other times they just suck. Or even the boss fight against Agent 3, where sometimes you can do way worse because of whatever random bullshit the Agent 3 decided to do that turn, or sometimes you get really lucky because the actual spread of your ink shots just happen to land well. And like I said, the problem is when the game asks you for perfection, and that Octo expansion boss does not ask you for perfection, it just asks you to be really good. One of the best mechanics in the Octo expansion is that you can get your armor broken and still survive. You don't have health, you have opportunities. And this isn't me saying that every game should act like that, obviously, but more so that whatever a game considers to be perfection should have a more specific definition than just, don't get hit, asshole. Because dice rolling on whether or not I get hit would be fucking awful. Even if you don't want to compare it to a dice roll, just compare it to, like, I don't know, a shooter, where guns have spread, and there was a challenge that was like, don't miss a single bullet. I can't guarantee that because a gun has spread. Asking me to hit literally every single bullet is just unrealistic. Possible, sure, but not something I can aim for out of my own skill, because that's just, again, not realistic. If there's even the tiniest fraction of a piece of a bit of room for error. But hey, we're not getting DMC 6 anyway, so no more hell in hell for me once I do it again on PlayStation 5. And even if Dead Cells sometimes fucks me over, that game's a roguelike anyway, so I get fucked over no matter what. And speaking of DMC, that brings me to one of our weekly topics this week, which I was going to save one of them for some other time, but I don't want to wait, because I do want to gloat about the second one, not this one. This one is just a general discussion thing, which is how do you bring music into an adaptation? The way this relates to DMC is with the obvious DMC cartoon that's coming in April, I think, by Adi Shankar, and the music choice for the opening theme of the show was not exactly one I'm on board with, mostly because I played DMC 3, and I know that that game has songs that work well for an introductory theme. Specifically, Devils Never Cry, the HRHM version, which might not be in DMC 3 proper, because I've only ever heard it in DMC 5, but point is, it's Devils Never Cry, so he could have used it. And hearing Limp Bizkit's Rollin' as the opening to a DMC show does sadden me, because it's emblematic of an attitude that a lot of producers or whatever have when it comes to adaptations, which is fuck like most things that come from the original thing. Like, you slap a skin of the original thing over a completely different thing, and now suddenly it's the same thing, right? No, it's not. The fact that we're getting a DMC show instead of a DMC anime in general is already, like, pretty flawed, which I know that Capcom, you know, tries to gear DMC towards the West, but that doesn't mean I want Westerners making it. Because make no mistake, this isn't a DMC anime, because it's not an anime. They sure did make it look like one, but Avatar The Last Airbender isn't an anime either, though some people would argue with me about that. They'd be wrong, but they would argue. But unfortunately, it works. They call it an anime, and now people think it's an anime. It saddens me that this works on my mom so often, but what are you gonna do about it? It's a show made for people who don't like anime, or don't watch anime at least, and for people who don't like DMC or video games. Which, to bring me back around to the original topic, is why it saddens me so much that the show is going with not a DMC song for the opening. Because I've noticed from a lot of people who, again, either don't watch anime or don't like anime, that they don't really like opening themes, or at least not ones that are very long. Because in American shows either don't have opening themes, or they last like 30 seconds long, and it's like a musical sting, and then, you know, the show goes on. Even among American animation, shows don't often have very long opening themes. Adventure Time's like 30 seconds long, so's Family Guy. Very few shows, if any, will hit the full 1 minute 30 seconds that anime do. Which is why even though Adi Shankar says things like he made role in the opening because it reminds him of when he was a kid or something, I can only ever think of the consequence of doing this, which is that less people even give a shit about openings in the first place. And then the next step of speculation, which is, will there even be any DMC music in the show itself, or is it just the opening? Some might argue it's an open and shut case, but let me remind you, it took us until the third Sonic movie to get Live and Learn. All other Sonic music was reduced to motifs at best, if they were even that audible to begin with. When you have a series that's so rich in music and you just decide not to use any of it, it makes me wonder what the fucking point even was. Which is kind of a rhetorical question. I know what the point is. It's to appeal to people who don't care about the thing in question. Non-DMC fans aren't going to give a shit whether or not there's the music in it, because they don't know the music, and even if they did, they might not like it, depending on what kind of person they are. And because fans of a series are more often than not kinda cucked, they're gonna watch the thing anyway, even without the music. Which, admittedly, is a pretty small point in the grand scheme of things, but I don't have much confidence about the rest of it being a good DMC adaptation anyway, so in my eyes, I don't see it being very good at all. And of course, the same thing applies to the Sonic movies, just in a greater capacity, because that's the whole reason they're in live action. Because you wouldn't watch a fucking cartoon, right? Cartoons are for babies. If it's animated, it's for babies. If there are drawings moving on screen, it's for babies. So you gotta make it live action for the capital G general audiences, and make sure all the music is very, very generic for those capital G general audiences. Because unfortunately, that's where the money comes from. I realize now that this section about music has just turned into me complaining about adaptations, but honestly, it's all part of the same deal anyway. My views on adaptations skew widely negative across most mediums, so there's really no winning with me. But if you have counterpoints or examples where this does work, then by all means share them. I'm not saying that you can't use any licensed music or anything like that in an adaptation, because there are definitely places where it could fit. I'm just saying more often than not it doesn't, especially with video games. But then as for our last topic, which I will admit is mostly just me being petty, Multiversus is finally dying. Which makes me extremely happy, because it's just one step closer to a live service-less world. I'm sure I've said before, but I consider mobile games to not really be video games, because the way they're designed is just not like a video game is. And live service games are like if you took all the design decisions out of a mobile game and put them into a real video game, just to, ruin it. And so anytime a live service game dies, I love dancing on its grave, because I get to make fun of two whole things. Firstly, the people who dismiss criticisms of the game by saying it'll get better, because now it won't. Should have finished the game before putting it out, maybe we wouldn't have this conversation. And then secondly, the people who spent money on the game, saying it'll be worth it because I'll just get to keep playing it for God knows how long, because now you won't. Which, to be fair, they are making it offline once it all goes down, but I don't know exactly what offline entails. The people who buy into these free-to-play games sometimes just don't think that anything bad will ever happen whenever the servers eventually go down, but this is also the same game that had a bug in it where it would just make you buy skins sometimes with your real-world money, and support wouldn't give you any refunds, so do not put it past them to do some stupid shit like making skins locked behind being online or something. Never ever hold your tongue when something is bad, because when it becomes worse, then you're gonna look like an asshole. And man, do I wish I had some of the tweets of people bigging up Multiversus back when it first came out, or even back when the game actually launched, not even the beta when people actually liked the game. Because guess who looks like assholes now? That's right, them. Well, also me, because I'm gloating about it here like an asshole, but like, they look like assholes, you know what I mean? A bit of an aggressive note to end on, maybe, but what's aggressive to you is really fun for me. So, thanks for coming to this week's episode of the Backlog Bunker. I'll see you guys next time.